welcome everyone. This is the Wednesday, March 18th meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council. Due to the public health crisis, we are actually coming to you in our separate homes and offices this evening. And so we just want to thank the city staff for helping us put this together on this historic evening. I think this is the first time that our city council has ever met like this. So to kick us off, I'd like to call us to order this evening and ask the city clerk to please call the roll.
Mayor Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember DeBala.
Here.
Councilmember Kostick.
Here.
Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Great. Thank you very much. As I said, we are in the midst of a public health crisis, so we are having to shift how we do business in our city. And so we know we are not alone, that there are cities across our state and across our country that are looking into new ways to conduct business. This evening, we have an agenda that includes 3 voting items that we will be looking at in a moment. We have taken public comments by email this evening that the city clerk will read aloud regarding our public comments. Other public comments that we received that were on non-voting items, the city clerk has sent them around to all of us as we do with our regular meetings. Looking ahead, we are not scheduling a meeting next week on March 25th, so there will be no city council meeting next week. We will tentatively have a meeting on April 1st. We are looking to see how the technology works this evening and how we can improve upon it. And we will put up notice of whether or not we're having a meeting on April 1st on the city website. We don't have any legislative agenda updates yet from Annapolis. They did end their session today, and we're looking forward to hearing from our lobbyist as soon as she can provide us with an update on how things went. So at this time now, I'm going to turn it over to our city clerk to read public comments on our voting items. Our first voting item is the first reading ordinance amending the Tacoma Park Code Title V Elections, Chapters 5.04 General Provisions, Chapter 0.08 Wards, Chapter 5.12 Fair Election Practices, Chapter 5.16 Voting, Chapter 5.20 Absentee Voting, Chapter 5.22 Provisional Ballots, and Chapter 5.24 Board of Elections. Ms. Carpenter, do we have any public comments on this?
We do. From Roger Schlegel in Ward 3, he submitted a comment. Reviewing the proposed election ordinance amendments, I've spotted these 5 areas of concern. For each item, I am quoting or summarizing the proposed language in the ordinance as amended. Then I am making a suggestion for how the ordinance should be adjusted based on a specific concern. First, definition of contribution. Lines 101 through 108 define contribution as follows. Any gift, subscription, loan, advance, deposit of money, transfer of money, or transfer of anything of value made by any person to any candidate for the purpose of influencing any election for city office. The term contribution does not include the value of services provided without compensation by an individual who volunteers on behalf of a candidate as a campaign worker, and it does not include safe harbor events. Stricken from this section of the ordinance would be any contribution to a candidate's representative or to a political committee to promote the success or defeat of a candidate for elected city office, or of any matter or issue which has been submitted to a vote at an election or is in the process of being petitioned to referendum. Suggestion: restore the definition of contribution to include candidates' representatives and political committees as potential recipients of contributions. Restore the definition of contribution to include any matter or issue submitted to a vote at an election. I am very concerned that the removal of these definitions allows for untraceable third parties to handle contributions on behalf of candidates or causes without any accountability. Also, clarify the rules about offers of employment or paid contracts to council candidates as compensation for lost income should they choose to leave or curtail their existing employment at the time of campaigning or in conjunction with ramping up their official duties after a successful election. Because council members are known to work long hours in exchange for compensation, which may not be enough to support the continuation of their lifestyles, I am very concerned that a candidate could be given an offer or guarantee of a job or contract, or could be pressured to accept such an offer from a supporter interested in mitigating the financial impact of the candidate stepping back from other paid employment in order to channel time into campaigning or into council duties. This could make the candidate and/or elected council member beholden to the interests of their employer or of the person who arranged the employment without any transparency or public accountability. Second, required message about non-affiliation with the campaign. Lines 270 to 274 read, any material that is published or distributed in support of or opposition to a campaign without being directly or indirectly authorized by the campaign should include the following statement. This message has been authorized and paid for by name of payer or organization affiliated with the payer. This
Ms.
message.
Carpenter, that's 3 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We are still limiting public comments to 3 minutes. Those comments had been circulated to the City Council prior to this. So thank you very much for reading that aloud. Are there any other public comments on this voting item?
Not on this item.
Thank you. Our second voting item this evening is a second reading ordinance authorizing the FY 2020 budget amendment number 3. Ms. Carpenter, do we have any public comments on that?
We do not.
Thank you. Our third voting item this evening is a resolution regarding the city manager's contract extension. Do we have public comments on that?
There's one comment on that. It is from Paul Hubner, Ward 3. I want to register my opposition to the upcoming salary and benefit package proposed for the city manager. If the Takoma Park City Council approves the motion this evening, which appears to be a foregone conclusion, the city manager will be paid $210,000 by the end of the year, plus benefits including a pension and 401k, adding another 40 to 45% to her overall salary costs. Please explain and quit ducking the issue how you feel justified in paying a salary equal to that of the mayor of Washington, D.C., the Montgomery County executive, and more than that of the governors of Maryland and Virginia for the city manager of Takoma Park, with a population of 17,400. The other officials are responsible for billion-dollar budgets and thousands of employees. Our city manager has a budget of $31 million and a staff of some 180 total employees. This is an outrageous waste of taxpayer funds. Please explain and discuss this issue tonight so that we, the residents, can understand the disconnect between our taxes and the ability to pay them and the council members' positions on this pay package for the city manager. There appears to be no justification for this salary package. Please advise. And that's the end of the comment.
Great. Thank you very much. Now we will move into our voting session. Our first item is the first reading ordinance amending the Takoma Park Code regarding our elections. I can actually see if I can share the screen here and pull up the document that we can look at as we go through. I know there are a number of suggested changes, and we are doing this for the first time. So if this doesn't work out, we're going to take our time next week and adjust this for the future. So looking at our the ordinance, just to give people some background, the Board of Elections came to the City Council starting in June 5th of 2019 and presented some changes they would like to see in our election code. We held over the last year a number of work sessions. I think it was 4 to 5 work sessions looking at the different sections. Our last one was on March 4th. Our city attorney is with us this evening. He has also looked at this since coming on board in January, has met with our city clerk and the Board of Elections regarding this. I know there are a number of edits that have been made since our work session on March 4th, and I believe there may be some amendments as well this evening. Before I ask someone to move it, I just want to ask the city attorney if he has any comments to make before we move the ordinance and then discuss amendments.
Mayor, happy to go through the changes that were made after our last work session on this, if you like. I don't know what your preference is or what your typical habit is in this situation.
Mm-hmm. How about we just highlight some of the ones that we made the last time to remind us of what was done, and then we'll move it and then ask for amendments. Certainly.
As a result of questions that were asked or a read through by me subsequent to submitting it back to the mayor and council, a number of minor changes were made. With respect to contributions, language was added to exclude safe harbor events from contributions. Flipping through, with respect to campaign material, as a result of the consensus of the council, we removed language that would require a person to include their address from that provision. I added a reference to a candidate also in the campaign material provision to be consistent with candidate or political committee language. A number of changes were made in section 512.022, which relate to filing of the campaign finance reports and in an effort to clarify when those reports needed to be filed. This was done at the request of council, and I hope I was able to meet that intent. Apologize, the cleaning folks were coming in. Also, a reference was made to include, with respect to the reporting, a provision that required the amount of each contribution to be identified and tied with each person. That was an oversight in the prior version of the draft. Language was added with respect to surplus campaign funds to restore language that had been stricken, allowing candidates to hold a campaign party for supporters after the election. And that was it's the same language that had previously been in there, but had been indicated as being stricken. With respect to the provision on absentee voting, in Chapter 520, I added language in this section to allow us to refer to the absentee ballot as process as vote by mail as well, just because there's some confusion, frankly, on my part as being new to the city code and how that tied together with the provision in the charter. And my understanding, and speaking for the city clerk, is they're essentially the same process now, which is becoming more and more common. I just figured it would be easier for the purposes of clarifying. That's a summary of all the changes that have been made since the last work session.
Great, thank you very much. Would someone like to move the ordinance?
I'll move it.
Who is that? Sorry. Was that Councilmember Siemens?
Kovar.
Oh, Councilmember Kovar, move it. All right. Do I have a second?
Yes. Cindy.
Councilwoman DeBala, second. Councilmember Smith, I see is your hand up? I think you're on mute, Councilmember Smith.
Couple of questions. One, in the email that you sent earlier today, 5.10.020A, it says, City of Tacoma Park, we're seeking to influence an election in the city. What does that mean, to influence an election in the City of Tacoma Park? Shall register with the city clerk.
Councilmember, can you give me the section again?
5.10.020 process for candidate registration A.
Okay, Mayor, are we at the proposed amendment yet?
No, that's not yet.
Okay.
So that's actually some, Councilman Costick asked the city attorney to look into something that was raised by a resident, and what was circulated before this meeting was a proposed language if someone wanted to propose that as an amendment. So if someone would like to propose that as an amendment, we can take questions on it. Are there any other questions or?
Yeah, I have another question. If we have to go to a vote by mail only option in November, does the current code allow for that?
Yes, sir. That was I received that question in another context earlier today, and the short answer is yes. I can provide the justification for that to you separately if you want.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Is there anything that the council has to do, or does it just automatically happen? Or
well, there's two points to this. The fail-safe would be the Board of Elections could make that determination if it came to that and the council was not able to meet quickly enough to do that. But as I understand Tacoma Park's process, which based on my reading of the charter and code is consistent with both, there will be an ordinance enacted at some point later in this process that outlines the specifics for the upcoming election. And if it is the will of the mayor and council, especially in light of everything that's going on, to go to an entirely vote by mail process, I would suggest that would be the time to do that.
okay. And there aren't any things that we need to, put into place before that happens? Do we need to allocate more potential money in the budget?
I'm not prepared to answer that question right now, but I suspect what Jesse and the city manager would tell you is that they would bring that to you as part of the options they would present you in that ordinance.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Costick?
Hi. So I have a couple of questions, but since Councilmember Smith had a question specifically related to the section 510, I will go ahead and propose that we add this section as an amendment to the ordinance.
Great. Do I have a second for that amendment?
I'll second that. Terry.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Siemens. Go ahead, Councilman Costick.
Yeah, I was just going to briefly explain a little bit with regard to this. Would it be helpful if I share my screen, or do you have your?
I can share it. It was hard for me to see people, but I can share it as you talk.
Yeah, so basically what happened was a question came up regarding what the period is for reporting, and basically what the campaign timelines are. So when someone could begin to campaign and when they would need to report. And it seemed like, as we were looking at the language, it seemed like it didn't make sense for people to leave it sort of wide open, so that people were starting to collect potentially campaign contributions before there was really a reporting requirement in place, and before maybe they fully understood what the requirements were. So I contacted the city attorney and asked him what his opinion was, and we discussed a little bit, and he proposed this language here, adding an additional chapter, which would define the process for candidate registration, as well as the need to register before collecting campaign contributions. Skip, would you be willing to sort of walk us through this a little bit? I myself had a couple of questions related to it, and I'm sure others do too.
Certainly. So the purpose, as you indicated, council member, of this was to attempt to define what I'll call a campaign season, so that we would have a better grasp on when funds were being raised and when they were being expended. So just going through each particular section, one of the things that I had to do in drafting this is be careful about utilizing, and I see a typo in it now, language relating to a candidate, because there is language in our charter that arguably could be read to indicate a person only becomes a candidate after the caucus. So I had to utilize the word person, which is broadly defined in our code. And there's language in those definitions related to seeking to influence an election, which would also include a committee. So that is the driving force in section 510.010, which is that it's the restriction that requires you to be registered if you're going to seek to influence an election. The Board of Elections recommended at the beginning of this process, as I understand it, the seek to influence language, which is now in many of the amendments, as opposed to campaigning. So that is the driving force in 5.10.010, and you can see everything flows from that, all of which is designed to make the election laws that previously have not really been, that they just haven't been extended this early on in the campaign season, if you will, to those individuals who are registered. Then we go into the process for registration, and I see the typo in 5.10.020. Candidate needs to come out of the title there, and it just needs to be processed for registration. But it sets as the second Monday in June during an election year as the date when those persons seeking to influence an election by which they must register, or beginning that day. And so this leads to questions about, well, there's various ways. What if a person's thinking about running, but they're not running? Well, there are certain scenarios in which they may not have to register, and there are certain scenarios in which they might have to register. But at least this allows us to take a position on that from an enforcement perspective if it arises. It also provides, as we go through, for withdrawal of a registration, and it allows a person, on the off chance someone is not really planning on being involved in the election, is nominated at the caucus, it allows them then to make a decision at that point. And then when we move to the next section, it provides for how to address these issues in a special election or a referendum. And then finally, the interpretation is really, may become important depending on how much people try and bend the rules about this. But the whole idea is to promote registration and compliance with the city's election laws. So that is a brief summary of it. And what it will do is it will pull primarily the reporting requirements and the campaign finance tracking requirements all the way through to when people seeking to influence an election may decide to register in June of 2020.
Thank you very much. A quick question regarding the process and the timeline for this. Jesse, as you were looking at this, does this seem like it makes sense to you, the second Monday in June, in terms of the process for administering this?
Yes, I believe that that makes complete sense in terms of time. It's after, it's before the 4th of July, which might be a kickoff time for people, and it's in the summer. It seems to make sense as a time to start the process.
Thank you. Mayor, I'll refer back to you.
All right, I was on mute. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments on this amendment? All right, I see hands raised. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. A couple of questions. So I'm not sure this completely answered my question about seek to influence an election. So seek to, which was also Councilmember Smith's question. So seek to influence an election is the person who's potentially a candidate or other people who might be a political committee, and that applies both, I gather, to electing individuals and elections around referendums or special provisions.
So person is defined in the new definition of person in the code means an individual, partnership, committee, association, corporation, labor organization, or any other organization or group of persons. And then it excludes the city of Tacoma Park or any authority of the city. And so then some of those other, for example, committee is defined as two or more persons formed in any manner which independently collects or spends money to promote the success or defeat of any candidate. So that is designed to be as interpreted as broadly as possible. And we could go through more of the definition sections, but that's the general idea there. I hope that answers your question.
And so a person or a committee can't raise money unless they're registered, or they can't do anything unless they're registered, like send out a flyer or send out an email or have a table at the 4th of July, or I'm just trying to get straight what the proposal is.
Well, so, I mean, there's going to be a bit of a gray area, and that's what the Board of Elections would have to interpret. But, you know, so if you clearly, if someone is raising money or expending funds, then they would need to register. As I indicated, if somebody is thinking about running or, you know, talking about running, I think you can make an argument certainly that this would not control under those circumstances. But then if you have a person who says they're not running but they're raising money or soliciting money, well then certainly I would think that the code would apply. And there's a number of different scenarios. And I believe that the city clerk and I walked through some of them. But you know, at some point, we're going to have to say, okay, people either need to play by the rules or they don't. And if they don't play by the rules, then the Board of Elections is going to have to make a determination as to whether enforcement action is warranted.
Two more things. My memory is a little fuzzy from 3 years ago, but before one is nominated, don't you have to declare in some fashion? And so what is the difficulty with that being the kickoff for raising the funds?
I'd have to defer to somebody who's been through that process.
And then secondly, I think June 2nd seems awfully early to me, but I'll turn it over to somebody else.
Mm-hmm. So sorry, Cindy, Councilwoman DeValle, your first question was?
My first question is there a simpler way to do it? If the concern is raising money without reporting requirements applying, then can we tag it to the existing process for declaring rather than creating a whole new process? And then my second question is whether I'm the only one that thinks June 2nd is kind of early.
Mm-hmm. I'd like maybe the city clerk to answer the first question. I would say, I spoke to our city attorney and also to Councilwoman Kostick about the June date, and because many people, if they are deciding to run for election, to sign up for the street festival, the folk festival, or other things, actually sign up happens in spring and early summer. For things like that. So if they're thinking ahead of time of getting a booth somewhere or doing some of those activities, there are some things that start to come up in late spring, early summer. And lots of times people do like to be doing things before sort of like the 4th of July. In particular,
that wasn't my personal experience, so I didn't realize that. I read for those things quite a bit later.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, but the city clerk has some observations on the first question.
The first question being, ask again, please.
Whether there is a simpler way to do this, tagging it, if the concern is not reporting on money raised, tag it to the declaring of candidacy rather than create a new process.
Well, so there is no, in the code, there is no declaring of candidacy until the nominating caucus at the current time. So I essentially created a process for people who would come to me early and say they wanted to run for office, they were planning to run for office, they wanted to open a bank account. So I created a process for people to do a registration with me, but it was not something that was codified. It was a process I created to make it simpler to as a courtesy to candidates who wanted to do that. So this would establish a way for candidates to essentially register with me. It would more formalize that process. The city attorney can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no requirement that someone thinking of running for office need register if they're not planning to raise money and they're not on our radar in any way. They don't need to register just because they're thinking about running for office. So although that registration date is, I think, the second week of June, no one needs to do it until they're ready, whenever that might be. It would just mean they couldn't do it before that second week of June.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Great. Does the attorney have other things to add to that, or?
No, that was the one of the points that I wanted to make was, number one, it's not June 2nd, it's the second Monday in June, which is typically closer to the middle of June, and two, there is no, you could wait until, right before the nominating caucus to register if you wanted to. It is only when you start to actively seek elected office or seek to influence the election that you would have to register.
Councilman Kostick?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I definitely appreciate the concern that that's a little on the early side, and I don't think we would necessarily want to encourage people to start campaigning that early, but I also think it makes sense to have there be some buffer so that if people are thinking about it, or they do need to raise funds so that they can participate in some of these events like the 4th of July or the street festival, they have that opportunity to do so a little bit earlier. And I also think it's a good just opportunity as a touch point with the city so that people are getting the information so they understand what the requirements are, since there will be increased reporting requirements for financials, so that people aren't starting to, become candidates and maybe not fully understanding that process.
Great, thank you. And I also think having that June date, it also helps people who aren't incumbents, who are, the first time running, because there is an advantage to being an incumbent. And having the date being in June is also more beneficial to people who are challenging, I think. Councilmember Kovar?
Oh, thank you. Yes. A couple of things that are maybe somewhat similar to what my colleagues have already said. It seems to me that the types of activities that we want people to have to register, to me anyway, if they engage in them, are receiving contributions or making expenditures. And if somebody is in other ways talking to people, but maybe they're not ready to decide whether or not they want to run, if I'm understanding the proposal correctly, I'm not sure we should be requiring somebody register in that case, because again, nothing really happens until the time comes in September for the nominating caucus. And in particular, if somebody just wants to have some discussions with people, which could easily happen in June or even July, about whether to run, and then decide quietly on their own not to, having to register, and then de-register strikes me as asking of them maybe more than we want to. So it strikes me that maybe it could be limited just to raising or spending of money. Yes, if you open a bank account and you have to pay some money in order to do that, or to get your registration for the federal business designation, then you have to pay money for that, as I recall, then that might trigger something. But if someone's just having a series of conversations, even if it's past the date, I'm just not sure. And then the second thing I would say is, and others have said this already, a person seeking to influence an election, I mean, that could be almost anything. I understand the city attorney said it's a gray area, but that could be someone else who isn't running themselves, right? Potentially just attempting to be involved in the process. And I'm not sure why, if I'm, again, understanding correctly, why we would want them to have to register.
Mm-hmm. Does the city attorney want to address any of the comments Councilmember Kovar made?
I'll just say two things. I would argue that having discussions with individuals about whether to run or not to run is not actively seeking elected office, and so would not cover that. But I certainly understand the concern. I think that with respect to seeking to influence election, certainly read strictly with that language, the interpretation applied that it could be someone just opposing a candidate's point of view. Okay, I can understand that reading, but I don't think that it's consistent with the overall context of the definitions in the code, which, when you, as indicated previously, person in this context, typically it would become an individual or committee, and then it ratchets up to a political committee, and that is what we want to regulate. With respect to the idea that we could limit it to simply receiving funds or expending funds, well, what if someone, and this is entirely up to the elected body, but what if someone were to actively begin campaigning but indicating that they're not receiving funds? And the only way we would know that, unless there's a couple of different ways you could approach it, but the only way we would know that is if they were tracking and reporting the funds in accordance with our requirements. So it's drafted this way to try and be consistent with campaign finance reporting. It is not designed to prevent individuals from articulating their opinions about any candidates for office.
Well,
Councilmember
just to
Kovar, did you
respond,
follow
thank
up?
you.
Yes.
Oh, sure. Thank you for that. I guess I'd say two things. One, if it's not intended to do that, we could potentially tighten it up. But the other thing I would say is, I'm just not sure why we need to be tracking somebody who is maybe is running, but hasn't raised or spent any money yet until the election caucus, and people can kind of do whatever they want until they either do or don't get nominated and get on the ballot, unless I'm missing something.
Well, that's
I
a
agree
decision for the elected body. I apologize. Yeah, as far as the timing goes.
Okay.
Councilman Kostick?
Yeah, I understand your concern, Councilmember Kovar, and I don't really personally have a strong feeling either way. I'm interested in better understanding, Skip, what you were saying before. Is what you're saying that that the concern is someone could essentially be campaigning and collecting funds, but not be subject to the reporting requirements because they haven't registered yet?
Well, I would argue that as the code is drafted now, or I would say that there is an argument that could be made as the code is drafted now that a person could make the contention that they don't have to track and subsequently report that. I think that this is a potential solution to that. And it also clarifies the time periods in which someone may start raising funds. I think that if you, as the code is currently drafted, there is no, what I have been referring to as a campaign season. There is a reporting cycle, but there is no campaign season. And I think that there's also language in the charter and code that creates wiggle room for when that may start. And it's theoretically possible without this amendment that a person could, or an amendment similar to this, that a person could raise campaign funds, withdraw from the race, or withdraw, and then we may never know about it if they didn't report it, and we wouldn't be able to enforce it. This is designed to prevent that scenario among other potential scenarios.
Thank you.
Councilman Kovar, did you have another follow-up question?
No, I'm just, I don't think in the form this appears right now, it seems too broad to me. I guess that's what I would say.
Okay, great. And again, this is a first reading of the ordinance. And so depending on how the vote goes on the amendment, people can revisit it for the second reading. Any other comments or questions? Oh, sorry. All right, seeing none, since we're using this new technology, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the vote on this amendment.
Councilmember Kovar,
No.
Councilmember Dalla,
Yes.
Councilmember Kostick,
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. Okay. Just the First Amendment. I believe we had another amendment. Councilmember Kovar or Kostick, were you going to move another amendment?
I can do that if Councilmember Kostick is willing.
Sounds good.
So this addresses language that's in lines 270 through 274 of the draft that we have before us. And I think actually this was also mentioned in the public comment that was submitted by Mr. Schlegel. And and the city attorney, both Councilmember Kostick and I independently reached out to the city attorney, and he responded with a way to address the concern that we had. So this is lines 270 through 274, if the mayor is able to shoot ahead to there. And yeah, there we go. And so it's E at the top of the page. And what it says is that any material that is published or distributed in support of or in opposition to a campaign without being directly or indirectly authorized by the campaign should include the following statement. And then the statement says that the message has been authorized and paid for by the campaign or the organization, and not authorized or approved by the candidate or campaign. And that seemed as if that could apply not only to a campaign or organizations that were really involved, but to an individual just saying something online, which I don't think any of us certainly intended. And so the city attorney has suggested a very small amendment so that what it would say was, instead of any material that is published or distributed in support of an opposition to a campaign, instead it would say any material that is published or distributed by any candidate or political committee in support of an opposition to a campaign would have to have the relevant disclosure. And so this would relatively easily then enable there to be a distinction between an individual resident who just says, hey, I think council member so-and-so is great, or I think council member so-and-so is terrible, versus part of an organized effort to either support or oppose that candidate. In the latter case, the disclosure would be required, but in the former case, where a resident's just giving their opinion, it would. So it's really just adding those six words there.
Great.
Hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any discussion or comment? Okay, will the clerk call the roll for the vote on the amendment?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember Dabala, Councilmember Kostick,
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Yes.
Councilmember Dabala, I didn't hear your response.
She's muted.
Mayor Stewart,
Yes. Councilman Dabala, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
How about that?
Perfect.
Yes.
are you voting
Yes.
for the amendment?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Great. All right, that's that amendment. Any other amendments? Oh, Councilwoman Kostick, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions rather than specific amendments, if that's okay. One of the questions that was raised, and I do want to thank Ward 3 resident Roger Schlegel for his look at this and the recommendations that he made regarding it and the questions. One of the questions that he had was with regard to, I don't have the section number, but it's lines 987 through 988, the Board of Elections and a provisional ballot vote, whether there it's listed as requiring a majority vote of the board rather than a majority vote of a quorum of the board. And it's my understanding, I checked in with you on this, Skip, and it's my understanding that you felt like it sort of already covered that. Is there any advantage or disadvantage to a different wording? Is there any reason not to sort of spell it out more explicitly?
So in this particular context, if a situation arose in which there was no quorum of the board, there could be no meeting of the board. So if there is a quorum of the board, it would be interpreted as a majority of those present. So it really is redundant, but it's the council's pleasure, frankly.
My concern was actually the opposite, if I'm understanding correctly, was that if not every member of the board were available to be there, would it be required to be every member or a quorum? Does that make sense?
It is, no, yes, I understand the question you're asking. There is no requirement for every member of the board to be present in order for this provision to take effect. If there is a quorum of the board and it is something less than the total membership, then a majority vote of those present would suffice.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question was, you had mentioned briefly that the language allowing parties for supporters had allowing surplus funds to be used for parties for supporters had been stricken before and was added back in now. I guess I just wasn't entirely, I didn't recall the trajectory of how that happened or why, or
well,
or what the thinking was on that.
I will give you my best recollection. There was a discussion about it. It was one of the first discussions I attended. I'd have to go back and check my notes. But I interpreted that discussion as it was the consensus to strike that. Thereafter, there was a subsequent discussion which became clear that there was an interest in having it put back in. So I put it back in. But, you know, I can't say that I recall specifically knowing precisely everyone's thoughts on that issue.
Thank you. I'll say I don't have particularly strong feelings on it myself. I don't necessarily think that's the best use of funds. But I think the provisions that are in place with regard to reporting would certainly make it something that if a person is doing that is maybe, you know, is going to be public, and if it's something that people don't agree with, they can vote or express their displeasure based on that. That's sort of what seems logical with regard to that. But I'm also open to taking it out as well. I don't have strong feelings on that. Thank you.
Great. Councilman DeBala. No, we can't hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I had also a couple questions, just to make sure that I'm clear on how certain things read. One is on line 92, in that section, it talks about campaign material applying to referenda and not just to election campaigns. And what I'm not clear on is whether contributions for money that's raised for referendum is something that has to be reported under the campaign finance provisions. So the campaign material has to be labeled with who's putting it out, and I get all that. But what about if there's money raised? Is that included in this?
So I think that it is applicable to any election that candidates or political committees would have to make, would have to report this information. I think that the other piece of this is that the proposed amendment, the first one we went through, specifically addresses special elections and referenda, so that it would make clear or more clear what is already in the code. And yes, I think one piece of this that may not be entirely clear to all is that when petitions when signatures are being gathered for a petition, I do not interpret the code or the amendment as applying to that process with respect to campaign finance. But if the petition is successful and then it becomes part of an election, then the code would apply to that portion of the process.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Two more questions. One is pretty specific. 512020B, it talks about who you can raise money from, and it exempts your personal money and joint assets, but not by implication the money that your spouse might put in separately. And I just want to make sure if that's the correct interpretation, and if that's what, just to clarify that for people.
Yes, that is the way I read it. That is your own funds, and then jointly owned assets with your partner. It is not written so as to include the partner's solely owned funds.
So if your partner wanted to bankroll your campaign, they couldn't do it past $1,000.
That is correct.
Yeah, I'm just clarifying. Okay. And my last question on line 406, just again to clarify, this is about the amount of donations, and a couple of iterations ago, it said that donations above $25 would be documented and that a total of $1,000 would be the limit. And the implication that I get out of this section is that donations of any amount, even $5, need to be recorded with the name and the address of the person who gave you the money.
Yes, ma'am. That is correct.
Just making sure I got it right. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Great. We have one other small amendment we need to make to clean up some language on section 5.12.010. We struck from this section that campaign material would include an address. And in so doing, if we want to keep that we don't require an address, then my understanding is then section B here, on lines 251 to 256 would be redundant. Am I reading that correctly? Yes. Okay. The city attorney is nodding his head, so I'm reading that correctly. So I guess I'm moving an amendment to cut lines 251 to 256, section B. Do I have a second?
Second.
Councilman Costick, second. Any questions on that?
I'm sorry, can you say again which lines you're referring to, Mayor? I didn't catch
Sure.
it.
It's 251 and to 256. It just becomes redundant now because we're not requiring an address.
Oh. So is the address on file somewhere? I forget how we resolved that earlier.
It's lines 242 to 244. In an earlier iteration, we said the authority line that states the name and title, and it had in it in an earlier iteration an address. During our March 4th work session, we discussed that was a change for us in the city and whether or not it was necessary. We decided at that time as a council that we didn't think it was necessary, so the city attorney took it out for us. In reviewing it, if we strike address in that line 243, then lines 251 to 256 are no longer needed. So we just need to clean it up.
So is there no longer anything about having the writing that's too small?
No, that is in line, I believe, the following section.
Oh yeah, in 265. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Dabala, do you have the city attorney, yeah.
But I want to be clear that if is there a desire to have the name and address of the responsible person on file with the city clerk? Because
I thought they would still have it on file, even if we took no.
Well,
the city attorney still with us? Or you? I think he might have frozen. Yeah, he's not with us here.
Uh-oh.
Oh man, we almost made it. Oh, wait a second. Councilman DeBala, did you have a question or a comment? Councilman DeBala, did you have a question or a comment? Your hand is raised.
That's unintentional.
Okay. All right. Does the city clerk know that? I guess I thought these lines were redundant and were only necessary if we required the address and the authority line if it was too small. But we do require in other places for someone to. Oh, the city attorney's back again.
I'm sorry. I
Okay.
don't know what happened there. Yes, I can hear you. I can easily move line 253 to subparagraph A, and then it's really 251 and 255 through 256, which really don't matter anymore. But I just don't know whether you want the name and address of the responsible person on file with the city clerk.
Yeah, I think our intent is to have that on file, and
Okay.
I guess I would ask the city clerk, because that's usually required now, is it not?
Yes, we would certainly want that on file. Yes.
Okay. Great. So I guess I will amend the amendment I put forward and to take line 253 and move it into A and just take out the redundant pieces of section B that we no longer need. Is that okay with you, Councilman Kostick, since you second the amendment?
I think it's okay with me. I'm having a little bit of a hard time understanding how that fits in. So we're moving line 253 to the end of right after line 244. Is that correct?
So it would essentially, and this would, some of this would just take place through recodification, but line number 2 in subparagraph B would just join.
Number 2. Okay.
Yeah, that would just become.
Yes, I see.
Yep, and then.
Yep, that's fine.
Yes. Okay. And
yeah, I thought it was line number 1. Yep, I'm fine with number 2.
Line number 1, I would have to add some just language to make it tie in with part A, but it won't substantively change that provision.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody else clear on this amendment? All right. Will the clerk call the roll for this amendment?
Okay, everybody unmute your microphones. Councilmember Kovar?
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala?
Yes.
Councilmember Kostick?
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy?
Yes.
And Mayor Stewart?
Yes. Thank you. All right. The city attorney, is your hand raised to make a comment, or?
It is, Mayor. And,
Okay.
and I apologize.
Sorry.
Reviewing a number of emails that I received to include a member of the public's comment, I think that if I could turn everyone's attention to line 102 on page 3. I think it would be more clear with respect to contributions if or political committee was added after candidate in line 102. So in other words, that line would read, or transfer anything of value made by any person to any candidate or political committee for the purpose of influencing any election for city office.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I think that was a question that I submitted to you as well. And I think that sounds good. I know my interest was in making sure that that section wouldn't allow for there to be any sort of funneling of funds to a candidate outside of the channels of reporting or the requirements that are in place. So I would propose that that amendment be made.
Okay, so it's right here. All right. Any other questions or comments on this? So Councilman Costick, do you want to move that amendment?
Yes, please.
Okay, do I have a second?
Sure.
Councilman DeBala, second. Any other comments or questions on this one? All right, seeing none, will the clerk call the roll on this vote?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Aye.
Councilmember Costick,
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. Does the city attorney have any other suggestions?
Not at this time, Mayor.
Thank you very much. All right, then seeing nothing else, no other hands up, I'll ask the city clerk to call the vote on our first reading ordinance amending the election code.
All right,
As amended.
as amended. Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Aye.
Councilmember Costick,
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for that. Our next item up is a second reading ordinance authorizing the FY 2020 budget amendment number 3. I don't believe we had any changes to this. Nope.
There's no changes.
Okay, so seeing no changes, would someone like to move the second reading ordinance authorizing the FY 2020 budget amendment number 3?
So move.
I'll move.
I have Councilmember Smith move, Councilmember Siemens second. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, will the clerk call the vote, please?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Aye.
Councilmember Costick,
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy,
Yes.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. All right, now we'll move on to our third voting item this evening, and that is the resolution regarding the city manager's contract extension. So just to review, our current city manager's employment agreement ends on March 31st, 2020. During her evaluation in the late fall, winter this year, we discussed her continuation of employment through July 1st, 2021. The new agreement includes requirement of a 60-day notice if the city manager resigns prior to July 1st of 2021. Her annual salary is $199,763.81, which may be adjusted prior to July 1st of 2021. She will receive a bonus of $10,000 upon fulfillment of the complete employment term and other benefits in accordance with city policy. So the new employment agreement has been posted on the city website. Would someone please like to move the resolution?
So moved.
Councilman Searcy, do I have a second?
Second.
Councilman DeBala, any questions at this time or comments? All right, seeing none, will the clerk please call the vote on this?
Councilmember Kovar,
Aye.
Councilmember DeBala,
Aye.
Councilmember Costick,
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens,
Aye.
Councilmember Smith,
No.
Councilmember Searcy,
Aye.
Mayor Stewart.
Yes. And before we leave this item, I just want to say thank you to the city manager for the work prior to this public health crisis we're having, and all the work she is doing right now. Because even since last Thursday, it seems that we've been working a very long time on this, and we're only into day 3 of this current crisis. So thank you for leading our city staff at this time, making the shift in how our city government works, getting everyone set up, and really just thank you very much for that leadership. The only other things we have on our agenda this evening is our council comments and city manager comments, and then we will adjourn. I want to recognize that I thank our HR director who joined us this evening in case anyone had any questions. And so if Tracy wants to leave, thank you very much. All right, any council comments this evening? Anyone want to raise their hands? Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to just say hi to all my peeps here in Ward 4 and across the city of Tacoma Park. I really hope that you're doing well in this difficult time and obeying all the rules that have been laid out for us to keep us all safe. I did want to highlight a couple of community resources that are available. The Village of Tacoma is, or Tacoma Villages is continuing to assist people, especially those who are considered shut-ins. They're providing free rides to medical appointments and to deliver groceries and prescriptions. They also are looking for people who just would like to talk, and they're giving phone calls to people to see how they're doing, and also to help them with the kind of the mental part of this, of being shut inside, not going out and socializing with your friends. Their annual fee for all of this is a mere $25, but they recognize that that during this difficult time, some people may not be able to afford that. And so they're willing to talk with you about that and don't want that fee to get in the way of you seeking help from them. You can make arrangements with them and learn more by contacting Wolfgang Mergner. His phone number is 301-202-7654. If you have trouble getting a hold of him or lose the phone number, you can contact anyone on the City Council in Tacoma Park and they can hook you up with him. Again, his phone number is 301-202-7654. And then I also want to let you know that Adventist Community Services of Greater Washington is continuing to provide food assistance to those in the community who need the help. You can contact them at 301-585-6556. You ask for Ed and he will schedule an appointment with you and help describe to you how to go about the process to get some food. Again, that was Ed at 301-585-6556. And on a different note, I would just like to suggest to my colleagues and the city manager what is probably obvious to everyone, but we're in a very difficult time that is going to have some severe economic impacts on the community, more than just community, the whole world. So I think as we enter this budget process this year, we need to be thinking about ways to be very conservative on our spending and look for reevaluating our priorities so that we can be prepared for what comes down the line. Thank you, and that's all.
Great. Councilman DeBala.
Yes, thank you. I want to thank the city manager and the department heads and all the staff for all what you've been doing the last few days. It does feel like an awful lot longer than just since, I guess, since last Wednesday when we started with talking about an emergency resolution, just in case we are. And I want to also thank the residents and local businesses, particularly the residents in Ward 2. It's amazing to me, the outpouring that I've received of people wanting to help, wanting to be in touch. I'm reminded of a Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times. And clearly this is a crisis, but it's also an opportunity to remember that we're all in this together and to recognize that each of our actions so totally affects all of those around us. The city council, the city manager will be talking about how to contact the city and how to reach out for services, but please, as Councilmember Stevens said, don't hesitate to contact me if you need to get connected to resources or if you want to get plugged in somewhere. And I'll be trying to set virtual office hours next week to be more available for people. That's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Councilman Kovar.
Thank you. I also want to thank the city manager and the staff for doing a great job and under trying circumstances. I really appreciate that, and I think we're all the beneficiaries of that. There have also been a lot of really excellent examples of voluntary action by people in the community, and many of those have been circulated online, and to the extent I can help circulate those, I'll certainly continue doing that. There's also been this nice trend that several of my colleagues and I were talking about just prior to the meeting of these sing-alongs at 6 o'clock. And tonight we had one actually at the intersection of Tulip and Cedar Avenue. And there were 11 or 12 of us spaced appropriately who sang together This Little Light of Mine. So it was just a good example of a small thing that can happen that is nice just for neighbors to experience. And I think, the challenge that we have is that the recommendation is to stay away from people. That goes against a lot of our instincts. And the only way we're going to really get through it all is by collaborating with each other and cooperating. So somehow we've got to find a way to do that while still maintaining the appropriate social distance. I think so far people have really stepped up and done a great job of that. And I hope we'll be able to continue doing so. Two other things I hesitate to ever question my colleague, Council Member Siemens. I do want to point out, though, Wolfgang Bergner has cut back a little bit of his involvement in the village of Tacoma Park. So I just suggest to people go to the village website and you can see all the information there and who else to contact. I'm sure Wolfgang will help, but he's been replaced by a couple other co-presidents now. So just I'll mention that. And then unrelated to any of these other things, I did do my my census, filled out my census form the other day. It's really quick. It takes less than 10 minutes if you're like me and there's only one other person living at my house. Very, very fast thing. And it's a great example. It's only 10 minutes, but if you're stuck home and you can't go out, fill out your census. And honestly, the more people who fill out online, which is easy to do, then we don't have to have census volunteers going door to door, which isn't really what we want people to be doing now. So for what it's worth, fill out your census. Thank you.
Great. Councilman Searcy.
Hello, everyone. So I just want to echo what my colleagues have said about the tremendous work that our city staff have done in a relatively short amount of time, not only transitioning to remote work, but also being as responsive as they have been in terms of addressing questions that residents and members of the council have had in a timely manner. So I just want to send special thanks to all of you. I know how challenging it can be to switch gears into working remotely and overcoming technological challenges while at the same time being responsive. So thank you all for that. I just want to also echo what has been said. I know it's very hard for folks right now. I know that we're a community that comes together but now is the time, unfortunately, for us to come together by staying apart. I think it's really important for people to understand that social distancing is not necessarily keeping you from your neighbor, but protecting your neighbor. It's not just about making sure that you don't get sick, but it's about making sure that the most vulnerable among us, who you may not look and see, hey, this person is an autoimmune condition. That's me. I can't take the flu shot. So for people like me, it's really important. Things like social distancing are very important because some people may have medical conditions which, if they were to catch COVID-19, would be a lot more challenging for them to overcome than the vast majority of people in the country. So it's important for us to do our part by maintaining the appropriate distance and by making sure that, quite frankly, we just stay home. It's okay to stay home. And I think that's the best piece of advice that I could ever share is the importance of staying home to protect your neighbors, because you don't know who may be dealing with some kind of medical issue, which might mean COVID-19 is going to be far more challenging for them to overcome than you. Again, the vast majority of people will likely get the virus because it's going to get worse and be fine. But what we don't want to do is overwhelm our healthcare system by having a surge of individuals who, like me, have medical conditions, which means something like COVID-19 would likely send you to an emergency room, which could overwhelm our systems and prevent people who are desperately in need of getting treatment from receiving the treatment that they need. So I just want to encourage everyone again to do your part, stay home. I also want to give a special thanks to Grace Wiggins and as well as Small Things Matter. I understand that there was food box deliveries that happened in Hampshire Towers to make sure that I think it was about 50 families that needed food were able to receive boxes, and they did it in the safe way, sealed boxes outside of doors. So thank you all so much for that. Also want to remind those property managers of multifamily buildings to please make sure that you do the necessary outreach to Grace Wiggins to make sure that you're taking the necessary steps to ensure the safety of the residents in your buildings. And that means frequent cleaning of common spaces and perhaps having to close things, amenities like gyms and things like that in order to make sure that residents in your building are safe. So definitely want to encourage all landlords, if you have any questions, to please follow up with our Housing and Community Services manager to make sure that we're all just in communication in case, heaven forbid, there's a case in your building, you'll kind of know what to do. I also want to thank all of those who are reaching out in terms of trying to identify ways to help businesses during this trying time. I know a lot of residents have seen emails from the Old Tacoma Business Association about helping to fund micro grants. I will say that we are working with the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Community Development Authority. I've spoken to Kaylee this week to also have a conference call or meeting with the business owners to try to get a better feel for one, what they need, and two, so that they can hear from us about the resources that we may have available. So I just ask folks to stay tuned. One of the things that we're learning is it is challenging when you're not already prepared for carry out or you're not already prepared for delivery to switch business model in a really quick way. So making sure that we're able to talk to businesses about what's appropriate and what's their right amount of distance and how to deal with carry out. But also as we're trying to think through issues such as unemployment benefits that many workers in a number of the businesses across the city may have to experience depending on how this thing plays out. So again, we're working with the Tacoma Langley Crossroads. We're working with Samara Cook Gaines, the mayor, myself, as well as the city manager. So there will be more to come with that in terms of when that town hall will be scheduled. I also want to shift gears just relatively quickly. I know that we were originally scheduled to have a traffic calming public hearing today about Wildwood Drive. And I know that there were a number of residents that were really looking forward to having an opportunity to just express to the council some of the day in the life that they're experiencing. And so I do want to read one email that I received from Hannah Gaudet, who has been really pushing and was the person who led the charge on one of the petitions that we were originally slated to vote on today. Just to give you all an idea of what life is like on Wildwood Drive. Things are a little easier now that, you know, social distancing is in place. But once that stops, we expect for the traffic volume to increase. So what she said was, I live at 7607 Wildwood. My husband and I are the originators of this petition. We have 2 younger daughters and are actively involved in the New Hampshire Gardens Community Association. We purchased our home in late 2015. Wildwood was always a busier street, but we have noticed significant uptake in traffic in the past year due to the Purple Line construction on University Boulevard. Cars also fail to stop at stop signs, Jackson and Holton, and will speed between 2 traffic circles. On the 7600 block of Wildwood, there are 8 children under the age of 10, and there is a large neighborhood bus stop at Jackson and Wildwood. We would request the city to install 2 speed bumps in the 7600 block of Wildwood to help slow down cars and discourage drivers from using our neighborhood as a cut through. While the increased traffic is an inconvenience when trying to back out of our driveway, we are more concerned with what the increased volume and speeds can mean for the safety of our children and other pedestrians. We would also note that there are no crosswalks at either stop sign on our block indicating safe space for pedestrians to cross the street. I will close with expressing my deep disappointment in the lack of action on the part of the city to find a solution to the traffic situation caused by the Purple Line. They have left it in the hands of local residents to find stopgap measures such as these speed bumps to help reduce the impact while neglecting to take action to identify longer-term solutions that will help ensure the safety of all residents. And I think that that's something that is important to note. The Purple Line is different. We've talked about this for some time, that we have to do something different. And I know we have the Complete Safe Streets Committee, and I was originally scheduled to host a tour of the Purple Line with them so they can kind of get a feel for some of the traffic. But because of COVID-19, that has been canceled. But I do want to encourage my colleagues to not just think about these speed bumps in isolation, because we will likely receive far more speed bump requests along Wildwood Drive, because the goal is to really slow people down because we can't stop the number of cars that are cutting through. But that we also start thinking about, especially as we enter into this budget season, potential funds that we may be able to allocate towards identifying longer-term solutions. So that's something that I do want to make sure that council members are aware of. And then lastly, I know I'm taking a while, we also received another comment. So this is from Jill Saletta. So Jill has been working on a petition to identify families that would be interested in having child care programs, particularly before school care, which, you know, surprisingly we're not in school right now, at the rec center. So I just want to read her note just so that you all know how, as again, we start talking about the things that people need in order to manage their everyday lives and where we could perhaps allocate resources to really get at true needs of residents. This is one example. As a city, as a Tacoma Park, many Tacoma Park families know, affordable child care programs are extremely difficult to find in the Washington, D.C. area. Fortunately, Tacoma Park offers morning and afternoon programs at the Tacoma Park Community Center. However, the program at the Community Center is exceptionally difficult to access due to long wait lists and various transportation difficulties. So after talking with parents in Ward 6, we decided to start a request for before care at the Recreation Center. This petition request was intended to gather only the signatures of those interested in creation of a before school program at the Tacoma Park Rec Center in an effort to make child care more accessible to all. So far, we've collected signatures from 41 families who are interested in this before school program. We'd like to present the signatures to you today. We hope this demonstrates to the mayor and council members that there is a significant need for additional affordable before school programs throughout the city. We are optimistic that our city leaders will consider adding additional funds to this year's budget to allow for the creation of a before care program at the Recreation Center. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Jill. And so I know that I've spoken to the city manager, and there is definitely with a number of 41 parents or 41 families that are interested, this is the type of program that we can invest in and have it pay for itself. And so definitely encourage, as we start talking through the budget, about adding additional programming, particularly as it relates to childcare, that my colleagues keep that in mind. So I know I've taken a while, but again, I want to thank you all and just hope that everyone stays in good spirits while we are all doing our part in terms of self-quarantine. Thank you.
Councilmember Smith.
I don't have anything. That's okay. Thanks.
Councilman Kostick, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to first of all reiterate my colleagues' thanks to the city manager and the city staff for your response during this difficult time. I know it's been really challenging and there's been a lot to do and a lot to figure out, and I really appreciate how much you've done, as well as how communicative you've been and how much you've worked to ensure that everyone knows what's happening and the word is getting out to the community. I also want to thank community members who have, as my colleagues have said, have really stepped up and offered to help in many different ways, and have really showed a community spirit and a desire to help each other and to look out for each other, which I think just reinforces the importance of community here and the way that we all work to support one another. I do also want to highlight a couple of other opportunities for families who are in need of food distribution, food assistance during this shutdown time. There are a number of food distribution sites that Montgomery County Public Schools has throughout the county, including ones at Rolling Terrace and Blair High School, which are probably the closest to Tacoma Park. And Tacoma Park Elementary School reached out to parents today with some information that they can contact the school directly and seek assistance if they're having difficulties, as well as seeking hard copy materials if they're not able to access schoolwork online. So there's a lot going on there to assist residents, but there's also, an ongoing need, and I appreciate everything everyone is doing to address that. And if there are problems or things that are not being addressed, I encourage people to contact me and to contact the city so that we can try to find solutions as best as possible. I also really appreciate Councilmember Searcy's emphasis, and I think it's a great description in terms of the importance of protecting our neighbors and remembering that social distancing is about protecting people, not about being unfriendly or unkind. And I know it's very difficult. I went out for a dog walk earlier today, and it was very hard to wave to people from across the street and not say hello to them, but not go up and say hello and have a conversation. So I just encourage people to remember that, to keep that in mind, to make sure that your kids understand that as well. It's very challenging for kids, young kids who don't necessarily understand what's happening fully, and older kids who may feel, teenagers who may feel a little invincible, who just are going stir crazy in their houses. So as much as possible, just do make sure you're staying inside and that you're staying away from other people, so we're all protecting each other. And I think also it's a good reminder that I think we really have to remember to be kind to each other during this time. There's been a great outpouring of support during the last few days, but as this continues, people are going to start to get stressed, and it's hard for some people who are spending a lot of time alone in their house, who are feeling lonely and isolated. And it's also hard for people who are spending a lot of time, with young kids running around the house, trying to do their work at the same time as they're watching after their children. So I think there are a lot of different emotions going on right now, and it can be challenging, but let's just remember to be kind to each other and continue to take care of each other during this time. I also appreciated Councilmember Searcy's note regarding traffic calming, and I know we had previously anticipated hearing from the Complete Safe Streets Committee, which has now been postponed. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them, hearing their report and their recommendations on traffic calming and measures that we can take. And I hope we can get back to that as soon as possible when we go back to some semblance of normalcy. We can revisit that in the future. So thank you all. It's good to see some of you and hoping to see more of everyone in the future.
Great, thank you. I'll just add a few words. I thank you to all my colleagues that mentioned the support that is out there. I just want to let everyone know that our city staff is doing an incredible job of keeping information on the city website up to date. Over the weekend, it was practically overnight. Donna Wright on our staff created a resource page with many of the resources that our council members have mentioned tonight. She continues to update that. And so I highly encourage that folks check that out. If you don't have access to the internet, please contact one of us and we can let you know about those resources. The other thing is to just double check things and information. And that's why I highly stress going to trusted sites like the city website or the county website for information and double checking it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of rumors out there and misinformation. And I think as Councilman Searcy said, sometimes we don't know people who have compromised immune systems or other things that make them vulnerable. And so sometimes we have good intentions and we could put other people at risk. So I highly recommend that you check out the websites and connect with organizations that have processes in place to help members of our community. And I just really want to, again, reiterate my thanks to the staff and all the work that has been done, even just getting this meeting together, this virtual meeting that we had here, which I think we're coming to the end of and came off pretty well this evening. We will be exploring options to make this kind of a more robust procedure that we can go through. Unfortunately, I do believe that we will necessitate meeting virtually for a bit, and we do have our budget coming up. And so I'll be working closely with the city staff to find ways that we can improve upon tonight. But I just want to thank them all, thank my colleagues, city attorney and everyone for being flexible this evening, for trying something new, and we'll improve upon it in the future. So I'm going to turn it over to the city manager now.
Thank you very much. I do have a number of things to speak about related to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'd like to just go through those tonight because that's what's facing us the most. The COVID-19 pandemic is here. Official restrictions and responses are being issued several times a day, so it's keeping us all busy. It will get worse. It's likely to impact us for months. As the number of cases surge, we'll need to adapt in many difficult ways. I'm pleased to have a strong senior leadership team and dedicated staff working to serve the public as we jointly try to move forward through this health emergency. And I really appreciate the council members. The information that has been able to be shared with us and out from us has helped a lot. And I also want to just note that Maryland and Montgomery County have really been good leaders in getting out, making decisions and getting out good information. Ultimately, and I think as Councilmember Searcy did speak very eloquently to, how we get through this pandemic depends on each of us doing the social distancing that's needed while also helping others. I've taken several steps under the emergency ordinance that was adopted by the City Council last week. I changed staff schedules and working locations without providing the notice required by our collective bargaining agreements and procedures. I am paying some employees for the hours they would have worked if we weren't in a state of emergency. I'm not docking sick and vacation leave balances for employees in most cases. The collective bargaining agreements and personnel code are adopted by the City Council, so these emergency exceptions need to be noted under this under last week's ordinance. I anticipate having to take some other actions, primarily related to funds for emergency assistance. Most of those actions are adjusting budgeted funds among existing accounts. I'm committed to be transparent about actions that are taken and continuing to work collaboratively with the City Council. One of the elements that will be shared with you relatively soon is some small business assistance that we may be able to coordinate, recognizing the difficulty that our businesses are facing. Today, in the most heart-wrenching thing for me in a while, I ordered that the city's playground equipment be fenced off from use for the safety of our children and community. A statement was posted on the website tonight, and we'll be getting signs up in areas where people play to remind them of the need for social distancing. This was a difficult decision because I want to see kids play, but as I heard the health information, it was profound. It would have required us to sanitize the equipment all the time and to ensure that kids didn't play close together. We do not have the staff capacity to do that protection. And again, as a number of you have noted, while the kids may not exhibit symptoms, they can share the infection. And we simply have members of the community that will not do well if they get the COVID-19. I want to note that the Tacoma Park Police Department is doing a terrific job. Our police officers are the staff most likely to be interacting with residents who may have COVID-19, or also the residents who may be facing mental distress. They're also having to learn all of the different rules and procedures that are being issued by the court systems. I think we get fairly significant procedures every day that were changes. We also have one of our officers that's been called up for duty with the Maryland National Guard. I've been working closely with Chief Duvall through this period, given the special role of the police department in this public health emergency. Our public works staff are out there. You've probably seen them. They're there every day to collect the trash and do the physical work necessary to keep the community clean. They're also undertaking some projects that are a little easier to do while the other staff is away. But they are stressed, and it's stressful for them to be away from their families as they're working. Most of the city's staff are working remotely if we can. We're providing the tools for them to use. They are adjusting. We're all learning different ways. And of course, they're also stressed and they are isolated. So we're trying to do a couple of things. We have our recreation department have been charged with developing some remote team building activities. And they're also looking at finding some ways to virtually engage with the public, to get some leisure, get some exercise, do some fun stuff. Similarly, our arts and humanities and library staff are getting some wonderful resources out virtually. As was noted though, where some real substantial work has been done in the last few days is by our Housing and Economic Development, Community Development Department with economic development activities. We have a number of families dealing with housing issues. They're made more difficult because right now there aren't that many inspections inside of units. There's some controls on that. We're working to try to help the businesses that are having these financial issues, as well as the number of people who are suddenly unemployed. One of the things I want to mention is that given the statement by the governor earlier this week, it's likely that the Washington Venice Hospital building will be reused and open to deal with COVID-19 patients. We've had discussions. I've had discussions with Adventist Healthcare and with others. It's not final, but I think it's coming. And I do know that Adventist Healthcare wants assistance in recruiting cleaners, food service workers, vendors to help get the building ready and functioning. And then they're going to want employees while they're operating, including nurses. All the hospitals need nurses. If you know nurses who are retired and they can help during this pandemic, it's really needed. So we're working both on the workforce and business connection side, as well as with our police department on what the impact might be to reopen the facilities for several months. We don't know what it's going to look like. The final decisions have not been made, but I do want to raise that because I think it's likely. And finally, we'll be getting a postcard out, a large postcard to every household within the week that directs people to the city website for information. The postcard will be in English, Spanish, Amharic, and French. We want people to know we care, that we have information for them, and that we want to help. We have, as the mayor mentioned, a list of resources that are very good, trusted resources, and we will keep updating that. I think there's a lot of people in the city that don't know to go to the city webpage for this information, and that we've got it all up to date. We really do need to emphasize the trusted sources. And so for health information, we direct folks to the CDC and the Montgomery County Health Department and other trusted sources such as that. I did pass along to many and to the council a link to a video that the state of Maryland just put out for seniors. It's excellent. It helps. Please share it with the seniors that you know. It tells people how to do social distancing, how to do cleaning. And I thought it was just very well done. There are some wonderful resources out there. Sometimes it's picking and choosing which ones are better than others, and we're here to help. Finally, our main city phone number is being answered by a live person during work hours from the person's home. And we also have the phones connected to many of our staff. So people can just call us and we will try to get them the help they need. We're here to do it right. And really am glad that we're working together for that. I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Great. Not seeing any hands raised. Oh, Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you for the report. That was very comprehensive and very helpful. I just had two questions. As part of the emergency authority from last week, and I know you've told us about this, but maybe just to share with the public, there was language in there about you designating your, I don't know if the right word is successor, but your designee in the event that you're incapacitated.
Oh, I should say that out loud. Let me please do. So if for some reason I'm incapacitated, Chief Duvall is the next in charge of this, for city management, and after him, Public Works Director Daryl Braithwaite.
Okay, thank you. And then I did just have a brief question about the park equipment that you mentioned, and I understand that's a really tough decision for you to make, and I think it's the right one given everything that's going on. But can you just say a little bit about what other places are doing, if the county's looking at something similar, et cetera, just to kind of put it in a little bit of context for us, if you wouldn't mind?
Sure. So the county parks have put out advice that people bring their own sanitizing wipes and clean down equipment before they allow their kids to play on it. I think that that's unrealistic. And I also feel that I don't have the staff as a city government to be able to make sure that the sanitary wipes are there or that we can do that cleaning. Many other communities, though, are doing the exact same thing that I asked our staff to do, which is to block off the playgrounds, to put signs up to encourage social distancing and remind people of that. Just even in the past few hours, I've seen perhaps 8 different towns suggested that are just doing the same thing. I've had conversations with other small towns and towns in this area, and they're all struggling over this and do feel that there's not a way to make the playgrounds safe. Part of the issue really is the length of time that the virus can live on plastic and metal. And we just, kids play on it. They are not gonna, they're gonna eat it. They're gonna do what they do. And it just will not get clean, and it will go home with them, and it will go to next to the person with some kind of an immune problem. It simply can't be helped. And it's an attractive nuisance, right? It's kids want to play on a playground, piece of playground equipment. I also think it's important that seeing the visual fencing and signs reminds us all that we do have to keep those distances even when we're in a park.
But to be clear, the parks themselves, just in the grassy areas or whatever, will continue to be
They're
open, right? I
open,
mean,
and people can walk and bike and run. They just really
Mhm.
do need to keep a distance.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, question about Washington Adventist Hospital site. Will we get any advance notice whether or not it is opened back up? And will it be used for a testing facility or actual hospital for people that have COVID-19?
So we certainly are going to get advance notice. They want our help badly. They're recognizing the difficulty of trying to, put back into place a building that they had pretty much walked away from. So we're getting advance notice. They're returning my calls right away, or they're contacting me right away. I don't know exactly how it will be used. That's part of the discussion that they're having, that I think all the hospitals are having with the county and the state on how to divide up the patients.
Are there any special precautions that are taken for hospitals that are close to residential areas where people that may have COVID-19?
So I can't speak to that very much, although I do know that right now the hospitals are putting the tents up outside so as to do screening and to help do segregation of patients and make sure that the system works well. I actually feel that that's an area that they're putting a lot of attention to try to minimize problems within the community or on the site of the hospital.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. And again, thank you for everyone. Reminder, we do not have a meeting on March 25th, and the April 1st one is still tentative. And so thank you very much. If you were watching this evening, we'd love to hear your feedback about how you thought the meeting went, and any suggestions as we move forward in shifting how our government's going to function for the next little while. So thank you very much, and we'll talk to you all soon. We're adjourned.
Great.